an easement over the full pool footprint of the reservoir, which is a property right that runs with the land, and riparian and water rights to the entire body of impounded water. When someone builds a structure inside the reservoir's full pool footprint without the dam owner's permission, that structure is subject to inundation. When the lake comes up to its legal pool, the structure goes under, and the builder has no claim against the dam owner. A lake's legal footprint is bigger than the water you see. Joe Cantrell drove up the second weekend in October as planned. Fishing rod, his 16-year-old grandson Casey, official inspection clipboard. He spent 2 days walking the dam, the spillway, the gatehouse, and every survey marker my grandfather had pounded into the granite outcrops along the original shoreline in 1948. He found 3 of the original brass benchmarks still legible after 77 years. Every benchmark was within 1/8 of an inch of its 1948 elevation. My grandfather, working with a slide rule, a Stanley Transit, and a self-taught engineer's stubborn patience, had set that lake out so cleanly that 3/4 of a century of frost heave and mountain weather had moved nothing important. Joe filed his preliminary report certifying the dam structurally sound for full pool operation, noting in standard regulatory language that the dam owner's restoration of the reservoir to its design pool elevation would eliminate certain unpermitted structures observed within the reservoir's recorded easement, the responsibility for which lay entirely with the parties who erected said structures. Rebecca Park at the Charlotte Observer published her first feature on a Sunday morning. The piece ran above the fold under the headline, "The Lake the HOA Thought It Owned." 4,000 words, aerial drone footage, a side-by-side of the 1948 floodplain survey and the current shoreline. Interviews with 7 Pinnacle Ridge homeowners who had been told by Preston Vandermark's marketing team that their cabins came with guaranteed lakefront access. By Tuesday, 22 of them had retained lawyers. By Wednesday, a class action complaint had been filed against Preston Vandermark personally, alleging fraudulent inducement in the sale of cabin lots knowingly built within a recorded reservoir easement. None of those homeowners had been told about the variance. None of them had been told about the 1948 floodplain survey. None of them had been told that the lake they paid premium prices to live next to was legally supposed to be 12 feet higher than it was. I delivered 90-day written notice to the Pinnacle Ridge HOA on October 14th, exactly as I had promised at the September meeting. Certified mail, giving the HOA until January 12, 2026, to remove all 109 cabins from the recorded reservoir footprint. Whitney refused delivery. Cassandra had it served by an Avery County Sheriff's deputy the next morning, formally and with body camera footage. Whitney called an emergency meeting that Friday night and announced the HOA would be filing an emergency injunction to prevent me from operating my dam at Design Pool. Judge Greaves denied it within 6 hours. Her written ruling contained one sentence that I taped to my refrigerator. The court finds no statutory or equitable basis upon which a homeowners association may compel a private dam owner to permanently abandon the design capacity of his lawfully permitted reservoir for the convenience of structures the homeowners association built inside that reservoir without permission. Whitney spent the next 7 days trying every door, knob, and window she could think of. She filed an appeal with the North Carolina Court of Appeals, dismissed within 48 hours as procedurally premature. She hired a Raleigh public relations firm and authorized $55,000 from the HOA reserve to manage the optics. The firm withdrew within 3 days, citing irreconcilable ethical concerns. She drove personally to my front gate on a Wednesday morning in her white Range Rover, walked up the driveway in her $300 hiking boots and a cream cashmere sweater, and stood at the bottom of my front porch steps. My father was on the porch in his rocking chair, wrapped in the blue afghan my mother had crocheted in 1991. Loretta was reading him the New York Times book review. "Mr. Honeycutt, may I speak with you? I'm here on behalf of my community, one neighbor to another. I'm asking you to reconsider." She took one step closer. "There are children, there are families. These are people's investments. Mrs. Vandermark, you are within 30 feet of my father in violation of a court order signed by Judge Sandra Greaves. I'm closing this door now. I am calling the sheriff. I closed it. I called Brody Kellaway. Brody arrived in 12 minutes. Whitney was still standing at the bottom of the porch steps, recording on her phone, crying decoratively. Brody arrested her on the spot for violation of the restraining order. The arrest happened in front of my father, who watched from the rocking chair without expression. Loretta said later that Walter had whispered, "Good," under his breath as the cuffs went on. The arrest hit the Avery Journal Thursday morning and the Charlotte Observer Thursday afternoon. By Friday, 3 Pinnacle Ridge board members had publicly resigned. I spent Saturday afternoon at the dam with Joe Cantrell walking every system: spillway, gate stem, bypass valves, emergency drawdown channels. Every component green, every elevation marker calibrated. Public safety advisory filed with the county. Sheriff Mattice put deputies on each access road into the cabin zone starting Monday morning. I called Preston Vandermark personally Monday morning. Mr. Vandermark, the cabins on the eastern, western, and southern shorelines are going to be inundated starting Friday morning. Most buildings will be partially or fully submerged within 72 hours. I am giving you one last courtesy notice to advise your homeowners to remove personal property. The water is rising legally, and there is no court in this state that will stop it. Preston was quiet for about 8 seconds. Mr. Honeycutt, I appreciate the call. I will pass the message along. 22 cabin owners cleared out their belongings between Tuesday and Thursday. The other 87, most of them in Whitney's HOA circle, did not. Friday morning broke clear and cold over the Blue Ridge. I woke at 4:30 and couldn't get back to sleep. Made coffee. Sat with my father at 5:30 while he ate oatmeal slowly with his good hand. I cut his banana into small pieces for him. I drove him to the dam at 6:15. Loretta drove behind us. So did Cassandra Boone. So did Rebecca Park with a video crew. When we arrived at the dam access road, 42 people were already waiting in the parking lot above the spillway. The mountain air was cold enough to fog every breath. The pre-dawn sky was the color of cast iron going slowly to pewter. Somewhere on the eastern ridge, a screech owl called twice and then went silent. The crowd parted gently as I drove through. I waved at faces I had known since I was 8. Joe Cantrell, his grandson Casey, Brody Calloway in uniform, Sheriff Mattice, Judge Sandra Greaves off-duty in a green jacket, the thin retired engineer from the September HOA meeting who turned out to be a retired Army Corps of Engineers colonel who had driven up from Statesville to watch, 2 reporters from the Asheville affiliate, 3 drone operators with FAA-approved waivers, the retired pastor from Beach Creek Methodist who had baptized me in this lake in 1992, and 3 of the Pinnacle Ridge residents who had cleared their cabins early, standing together at the edge of the lot with a thermos of coffee and a half-dozen biscuits with country ham to share. Whitney Vandermark was not there. Preston Vandermark was not there. I walked my father to a folding chair at the overlook above the spillway. Loretta brought a wool blanket. Brody handed him a paper cup of coffee. At 7 o'clock sharp, Joe Cantrell walked the perimeter one final time. Then he walked back to where I stood at the radial gate control panel. Wyatt, the dam is yours. The reservoir is yours. The decision is yours. Whenever you're ready. I looked at my father. He nodded. I picked up the handset, called my downstream creek monitoring station, clear gauges. Called the upstream tributary stations, all 3 flowing normal. Called county dispatch, all clear. I unlocked the radial gate panel with the brass key my grandfather had carried in his front shirt pocket every day for 35 years. I turned the key. The motor hummed. The gate began to rise. The bypass channel that had been holding the lake at 2,772 feet for 52 years began to close. The spillway intake gates rotated downward. The upstream creek flow began, for the first time since January 1973, to fill the lake at full design rate. The water rose 2 inches the first hour, 8 inches by noon, 18 inches by sundown. We sat on the overlook through the entire day. Joe ate a country ham biscuit. My father told the same 3 stories about my grandfather he had been telling since I was 8. Pastor Edmund said a quiet prayer at noon for the slow restoration of things that were always supposed to be. At sundown, I drove my father home. The lake had risen 26 inches. 41 of Whitney Vandermark's cabins had water inside the first floor. My father didn't say a word the whole drive back. When I helped him out of the truck at the bottom of our front porch steps, he looked up at me with the small, level, slightly trembling smile that had been my whole childhood. "Wyatt, your grandfather would have liked today." "Yes, sir." "He'd have liked the part where you turned the key. He'd have liked the silence afterward. He'd have liked the way the water came in like it was returning home." The lake rose 12 to 15 inches per day, exactly per the design specifications my grandfather had filed in 1948. By Saturday noon, 63 cabins had water inside. By Saturday evening, 81. By Sunday morning, every one of the 109 cabins was at least partially flooded. Rebecca Park's drone crew filmed the rising water from a quarter-mile up. The footage looked like a slow tide coming in over a model railroad village. Cabins disappearing from the deck up, rooftops sinking to the ridgeline, white propane tanks bobbing loose and being collected by Joe Cantrell's grandson in a rented John boat with a polite recovery permit. Whitney surfaced Sunday afternoon at an emergency homeowners meeting at the Pinnacle Ridge Clubhouse. The Charlotte Observer was there. The Asheville TV affiliate was there. 3 Charlotte television stations were there. Whitney didn't get to give her speech. A homeowner named Marina Pickett, 68, retired oncology nurse, owner of Cabin 37 on the southern shore, a vocal Whitney loyalist for 2.5 years, stood up in the front row before Whitney reached the podium. "Whitney, sit down. We need a vote of no confidence in the board right now." The vote was held by paper ballot, live on the county cable feed. 86 in favor of removal, 3 against, 1 abstention. Whitney Vandermark was ejected as president of the Pinnacle Ridge Lake Estates Homeowners Association at 4:43 p.m. on Sunday, November 16, 2025. Marina Pickett was elected interim president by acclamation at 4:47. Marina's first official act was to call me on her cell phone from the clubhouse floor and ask if I would meet with a homeowner delegation Monday morning. I told her I would. We talked for 3 hours. By the time we left Cassandra's Boone office, we had a framework. Cassandra and I would offer recorded shoreline leases to any homeowner whose cabin sat on or above the historical 1948 high water mark at a fair annual rate, fully recorded and transferable. We would not offer leases for any cabin built below the historical waterline because those cabins were now lakefront floor and could not be legally rebuilt. 26 of the 109 cabins met the criterion. The other 83 were gone. Whitney was arrested again on Wednesday, felony embezzlement related to the $55,000 she had authorized to the PR firm without board approval. By the end of the year, she faced 8 criminal counts. She pled guilty in February of 2026 to 4 counts of embezzlement, 2 counts of trespass, and 1 count of violating a restraining order. She received 22 months in state prison, 2,000 hours of community service, and a lifetime ban from serving on any homeowners association in the state of North Carolina. She did not request mercy at sentencing. She did not look at me when the bailiff took her into custody. She looked briefly at my father, who had attended the sentencing in his rocking chair, pushed up against the gallery wall, blue Afghan across his lap. He gave her one small, slow nod that said neither forgiveness nor cruelty. Preston Vandermark settled the class action for $3.8 million in March 2026, surrendered his North Carolina bar membership in April, and moved to Florida in May. Honeycutt Lake settled at its full design pool of 2,783 feet on a Thursday morning in late November, exactly where my grandfather had set it in 1948. It was the deepest, coldest, clearest blue I had ever seen it. 6 months later, on a warm morning in late May 2026, the Honeycutt Family Lake Conservation Trust held its first public event. The trust covered the 420 acres of shoreline and watershed surrounding the lake. We had granted it a permanent conservation easement in March, ensuring no developer would ever plat the property again. The trust planned guided fishing trips for veterans, a summer field school for Beach Creek elementary kids interested in hydrology and watershed science, and an annual fly fishing tournament whose proceeds funded ALS research in honor of my sister Hannah. 26 recorded shoreline leases had been signed with Pinnacle Ridge homeowners. The annual ground rent paid for the conservation easement, the field school, the veterans program, the ALS tournament, and a small monthly stipend for my father's home health care. Loretta Marchison was elected by unanimous vote of the Honeycutt family, which is to say my father and me, to chair the Conservation Trust's first Community Advisory Board. She accepted with tears in her eyes and a handwritten speech that thanked my grandfather, my father, and every person in Beach Creek who knew what water was for. Joe Cantrell retired from the state of North Carolina in February and bought a small fishing cabin on the legal high water mark, the first lease Cassandra and I signed. His grandson Casey came up most weekends and helped my father with the bird feeders, the porch railing, and the slow rebuilding of an old wooden john boat in the back barn. By April, Casey had decided he wanted to study civil engineering at NC State. He told me this on a Saturday morning while we sat at the dam overlook with 2 mugs of coffee. I told him my grandfather would have approved. Joe Cantrell, 20 feet away with a fly rod, pretended not to hear us. He smiled the whole time. Marina Pickett ran for Avery County Commissioner in November and won by 61 points. Her first act in office was to introduce a county ordinance requiring HOA developers to disclose every recorded easement and impoundment footprint within 5 miles of any new development. The ordinance passed unanimously. 3 Avery County developers withdrew incomplete subdivision plats within a month. Cassandra Boone published a chapter on the Pinnacle Ridge case in a national property law treatise. She titled it, "Reservoir Easements: Why You Should Never Build a Cabin Inside a Lake." She sent me a signed copy with a handwritten note. "For Wyatt, the beautiful case I waited 20 years for. I keep it on the shelf above my grandfather's slide rule." The 83 cabins below the high water mark were never rebuilt. Some of them are still down there, settling into the lake floor under 12 feet of cold blue water, where the trout swim through their kitchens every spring. On a warm afternoon in late May, the Conservation Trust's first event brought my father to the water's edge in his rocking chair, wrapped in the blue Afghan, a thermos of coffee, and a fishing rod he hadn't used in 11 years. I helped him cast once into the cold mountain water. A rainbow trout hit on the 3rd drift. My father reeled it in slowly, his good hand steady on the cork grip. Joe Cantrell unhooked it for him. We released it back. My father watched it disappear into the depths of a lake that was, for the first time in 52 years, full. He looked up at me with the small, slow smile that had been my whole childhood. "Wyatt?" "Yes, sir." "Your grandfather's standing right here. I can feel him." I put my hand on his shoulder. The wind moved through the white pines. Pop. So can I. The trout swam down into the cold mountain dark. The wind kept moving through the white pines. My father closed his eyes for one slow second under the warm afternoon sun, and when he opened them, he was 8 years old again, standing on this same shoreline beside his own father, watching a different rainbow trout disappear into the same blue water 70 years before any HOA in 3 counties had ever heard of Honeycutt Lake. That, I thought, was what the variance had been waiting for. That was what my grandfather had left half empty. That was what Whitney Vandermark had never understood. A lake is not water. A lake is patience. Here's what I want you to take from this story. Whitney Vandermark didn't lose because she lost a lawsuit. She lost because she built 109 cabins inside a lake. She built them inside a lake because a reservoir had been sleeping for 52 years under a variance she didn't know existed. She built them on the assumption that quiet people don't win, on the assumption that a hydraulic engineer with a Parkinson's father wouldn't come home to finish a job his grandfather had started in 1948. She built them on the assumption that the footprint of a lake is only as big as the water you can see. It isn't. A lake's legal footprint is bigger than the water you see. So is a family. The real lesson is older than any of this. Go to your county recorder's office. Pull the original documents. Read every page. Because somewhere in the history of the land you love, someone may have drawn a line on a map that nobody else ever bothered to look at. My grandfather drew that line in 1948 with a slide rule and a transit and a self-taught engineer's stubborn patience. He left the lake half empty so that whoever loved it the most could fill it. He waited 77 years. The answer came home in the spring of 2024. We turned the key in November of 2025. The water is still rising where it's supposed to be. If this story found you, subscribe and stick around. There are more of these. There always are. That dam stays closed or my husband's lawyers will bury you, you hillbilly engineer. Whitney Vandermark stood on the spillway catwalk of my grandfather's 1948 earthen dam in $300 hiking boots, her blonde ponytail whipping in the September wind, while 109 illegally built cabins sat below her along a shoreline that legally belonged to the bottom of my lake. Her HOA had spent 2 years building those cabins on land that was supposed to be 12 feet underwater. Her husband had sold lake access lies to every homeowner in 3 counties. And on the morning she stood on my dam, screaming at me to abandon a federally mandated reservoir inspection, she had no idea that I had already filed every permit, retained the best dam safety attorney in North Carolina, and given her HOA 90 days to remove those cabins before I restored my grandfather's lake to its full legal pool. 90 days ended at midnight. The spillway gates opened at sunrise. My name is Wyatt Honeycutt, 47 years old, recently retired hydraulic engineer who spent 22 years with the Tennessee Valley Authority designing dam safety upgrades from the Great Smokies to the Cumberland Plateau. I came home to Avery County, North Carolina in the spring of 2024 to take care of my father, Walter Honeycutt, 74, retired school teacher, early-stage Parkinson's, sharper than most men half his age on his good days. My family has owned 600 acres of Blue Ridge Highlands above Beach Creek since 1923, when my great-grandfather traded a pair of mules and a single-shot rifle for the original deed at the Avery County Courthouse. The lake, Honeycutt Lake, on every USGS map printed in the last 60 years, was built in 1948 by my grandfather, Otis Honeycutt, who was the sheriff of Avery County, a Korean War veteran and a self-taught civil engineer with an 8th grade education and a slide rule he carried in his front shirt pocket every day for 35 years. He cut the spillway by hand. He poured the concrete core with 2 cousins in a mule named Francis. He filed every permit himself in his own careful pencil block print at a time when most rural North Carolina farmers built dams without bothering. The dam impounded 28 surface acres of cold mountain water fed by 3 creeks. My grandfather used to say the lake was for trout, swimming, and the slow comfort of having something beautiful to look at from the front porch. My older sister Hannah died of ALS in November of 2023. She was 44. She left a husband and 2 teenage daughters in Asheville. She had been my best friend my whole life. She taught me to fly fish at this lake when I was 7 and she was 9. She had been a public defender in Buncombe County for 18 years, the kind of lawyer who would drive to a client's apartment at midnight in a snowstorm to keep a custody fight from collapsing. When the ALS diagnosis came in February of 2022, she didn't tell anyone for 6 weeks. She wanted, she said later, to have one more spring on her feet. After her funeral, I quit TVA, sold my apartment in Knoxville, and moved back into the same upstairs bedroom I'd grown up in. I'm divorced. Quiet divorce 9 years ago, no kids. I cook breakfast for my father every morning. On Saturdays, I walk the eastern shore of the lake with him, as slow as he needs, while he tells me the same 3 stories about my grandfather that he's been telling me since I was 8. 2 miles north of our property, in 2021, a Charlotte developer named Preston Vandermark broke ground on a gated community he called Pinnacle Ridge Lake Estates. 120 homes, brick and cedar mountain houses with 3-car garages, stone fireplaces, koi ponds. The development sold out by Christmas of 2022. The marketing materials promised exclusive private lake access to a body of water the developer did not own and had no legal right to grant. The lake was Honeycutt Lake, my lake. Preston's wife, Whitney, 41, polished, no children but 2 Cavalier King Charles Spaniels named Hennessy and Cabernet, became the inaugural president of the Pinnacle Ridge HOA in March of 2022. By July, she had passed a resolution declaring communal shoreline access to Honeycutt Lake. By November, they had built the first guest fishing cabin along the northern shoreline. By the time I moved home in March of 2024, there were 73 cabins. By September of 2025, there were 109. My father, who is a kind man and the son of a kind man, had been letting it slide. He had written one polite letter to the HOA in 2022, reminding them the lake was private. They replied with a 6-page letter from Preston Vandermark Esquire, asserting theories of prescriptive easement, neighborly use, and established community access. My father filed the letter in a green folder in his desk and went back to his New York Times crossword. He had been waiting for me to come home. I spent my first 6 months back doing nothing about the cabins, partly because I was figuring out my father's medication schedule, partly because I wanted to understand the full scope, but mostly because I had spent 22 years building dams for a living, and I knew that the slower you move at the start, the cleaner you cut at the end. In September of 2024, I drove to the Pinnacle Ridge Clubhouse on a Tuesday evening. Khaki pants, plain blue button-down, parked at the back of the lot. I didn't introduce myself. I sat in the back row with a yellow legal pad and a pen. Whitney spent 20 minutes discussing landscaping bids. She spent 4 minutes congratulating the HOA on hitting 107 completed lake cabins, using phrases like, "our shared mountain heritage," and the integrity of our community amenity. At 8:15 during public comment, I stood up. "Excuse me, Mrs. Vandermark. I'd like to introduce myself." She offered the practiced smile of a woman who assumed every new face was a potential vote. "Of course, and you are?" "Wyatt Honeycutt." The room went very quiet. About 40 residents turned to look at me. Whitney's smile froze for 1/2 second and then reset. "Mr. Honeycutt, how nice. We've heard so much about your father." "I'm sure you have. I'm here to address one item not on tonight's agenda. The 107 cabins your community has built along the southern, eastern, and western shorelines of Honeycutt Lake." A short silence. Then Whitney laughed, a brittle sound that came from somewhere behind her teeth. "Mr. Honeycutt, those cabins are well within the legally established shoreline access this community has enjoyed for decades. Your grandfather himself permitted recreational use of the lake. We have a clear prescriptive easement under North Carolina common law. My grandfather permitted neighbors to fish from the shore. He did not permit the construction of permanent structures. Permanent structures are a natural evolution of established use, and your father did not object. My father wrote you a letter in 2022, and your attorney responded comprehensively." I nodded. "Mrs. Vandermark, I'm not here to argue prescriptive easement tonight. I'm here to let you know that the dam impounding Honeycutt Lake is overdue for its mandatory 10-year North Carolina Dam Safety Act inspection, which requires a full pool integrity test. The next inspection window is November of this year. Per the original 1948 design specifications and the 1971 Federal Floodplain Survey, the full pool elevation of Honeycutt Lake is 2,783 feet above sea level. The current pool is at 2,772 feet. There is, in other words, an 11-foot discrepancy between the lake's current surface and its legal full pool. The room went very quiet. A thin, retired engineer type in the third row opened his mouth slightly. After my November inspection, I will be restoring the lake to its full legal pool. Per the original dam permit, this is the lake's designed elevation. It is also, by my calculation, approximately the elevation at which most of your 107 cabins will be sitting in 4 to 11 feet of water. I'm letting you know tonight, 6 weeks in advance, so that your community has the opportunity to remove the structures before the test. Whitney's mouth opened. It stayed open for about 3 seconds. Then she said, in a voice an octave higher than the one she'd been using, "Officer, this man is threatening our community. I want him removed from this meeting." There was no officer, only the maintenance manager, a 50-year-old man named Lonnie Garrett, who looked at Whitney like she'd asked him to perform surgery. "I'll see myself out. My attorney will follow up in writing within 2 weeks. Good evening." I walked out. I drove home. I sat with my father on the porch and watched the moon rise over the eastern shore. He didn't say much. He just put his good hand on my shoulder and let it rest there. The white pines moved in the dark. A great horned owl called from the eastern ridge twice and then went silent. After a long minute, my father said, "Wyatt, your grandfather built that dam to be filled, not for show. He filled it to 4 feet below the design pool the year I was born, and ran it that way until his heart gave out in 1973. Whitney Vandermark does not know how big the lake is supposed to be. We do. He patted my shoulder once and went inside to make tea. I sat alone for another hour and watched the moon clear the ridgeline and silver the surface of water that was, by every map and permit and grant of impoundment ever filed in Raleigh, mine. Whitney's first countermove came 5 days later. A 9-page letter on Vandermark Law Group letterhead, threatening me under 17 different legal theories ranging from prescriptive easement to intentional infliction of emotional distress. Signed by Preston Vandermark, J.D. I had my own attorney by then. Her name was Cassandra Boone, 62 years old, third-generation Eastern North Carolina, partner at a 6-person firm in Boone that specialized in exactly 3 things: dam safety, riparian rights, and Appalachian land disputes. My old TVA supervisor had recommended her. In our first meeting, she told me I had what she called a beautiful case and that she'd been waiting 20 years for an HOA to do something this stupid. Cassandra responded to Preston's 9 pages with 1 page containing 3 sentences. Mr. Vandermark, the Honeycutt family has owned the dam, the impoundment, the shoreline easement, and all riparian rights to Honeycutt Lake since 1948, pursuant to a properly recorded grant of impoundment from the state of North Carolina. Your community structures lie within the lake's recorded full pool footprint and are subject to inundation upon any lawful operation of the dam at design capacity. Please direct further correspondence to my office." She mailed it certified. Preston didn't respond for 9 days. In the meantime, Whitney did what every antagonist eventually does. She escalated publicly. She emailed every Pinnacle Ridge resident a mass communication titled, "Urgent, Defending Our Community from Hostile Outside Action," describing me as an aggressive recent transplant attempting to seize community land through bad faith environmental claims. The email included 3 photographs of my father, taken without permission from a passing car, and accused me, in language that was almost, but not quite actionable, of elder financial manipulation. My father read the email at the kitchen table on a Friday morning. He looked up at me with the gentle, slightly trembling smile he'd been wearing since the Parkinson's started. "Son, she called me a victim of elder manipulation by you." "Yes, sir." He laughed, a small, wheezy laugh that ended in a coughing fit, and when it finished, he was the brightest he'd been in 3 weeks. "Wyatt, your grandfather would have liked this woman. He'd have liked her because she's going to make this whole story so much better than it was already going to be. Don't you stop her. Let her keep going. The dumber she gets, the prettier the lake's going to look in November." By the end of the week, Whitney had organized the Pinnacle Ridge Shoreline Preservation Committee and filed separate complaints with 3 state agencies: Wildlife Resources, Environmental Quality, and Dam Safety, all alleging that my November inspection was a weaponized flooding event. Cassandra called me Wednesday morning, laughing. "Wyatt, they just filed 3 complaints with 3 agencies that all report to one director, who happens to be a man I've known since 1986, who happens to think very poorly of Charlotte real estate attorneys, who happens to be planning a fishing trip to Honeycutt Lake the second weekend in October. His name was Joe Cantrell, State Dam Safety Engineer for the Western District. I had worked with Joe at TVA in 2009. All 3 complaints were dismissed within 10 business days. Running out of agencies to complain to, Whitney tried directions I hadn't expected. On a Tuesday afternoon, my father's home health aide, a kind woman named Loretta Marchison, called me from her cell phone in our driveway, her voice shaking. "Mr. Honeycutt, there's 2 men here. They say they're from Pinnacle Ridge Security. They want me to let them into the house to do a wellness check on your father. They have a clipboard." I was 20 minutes away in Boone picking up prescription refills. I told Loretta to lock the door and call the sheriff. I called the sheriff myself from the truck. I drove home at speeds I will not put in writing. When I pulled into the driveway, the 2 men were gone. My old high school classmate, now Sergeant Brody Calloway, was sitting on the front porch with my father and Loretta. "Wyatt, they're gone. We got plates. They were Pinnacle Ridge board members. A Foster Knox and a Mindy Astergaard. Whitney Vandermark sent them." No clear legal basis, just trying to get inside and get their hands on documents. Walter Honeycutt rose from his rocking chair slowly and put his hand on my forearm. "Son, I'm fine. They didn't get inside. Loretta did everything right." He squeezed my arm. "But Whitney just made a mistake. She came to my house. She came at me. Whitney's been a fool, but she'd been a careful fool. Now she's not. Now we have a story." He was right. By Friday morning, the sheriff had referred the trespass complaint to the Avery County DA. By Friday afternoon, the local paper had it on the front page. By Saturday morning, Cassandra had filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order against the entire Pinnacle Ridge HOA board. The judge, Sandra Greaves, 58 years old, Avery County native, who had attended kindergarten with my mother, granted the motion within 4 hours. By Sunday night, an investigative reporter from the Charlotte Observer named Rebecca Park had called me about a developing story on North Carolina HOA aggression and questionable real estate practices in the Blue Ridge. Whitney had spent 2.5 years building 109 cabins on a lake she didn't own. She had spent the last 6 weeks building 1 defamation suit, 3 administrative complaints, 2 attempted home invasions, and a Charlotte Observer feature. Cassandra started a fresh manila folder labeled Notice of Intentional Conduct. By the end of October, it had 38 documents in it. The dam inspection was scheduled for November 14th. I had decided, after the home health aid incident, that it would not happen as a quiet engineering exercise. It would happen as a public event. But the reveal that turned a strong case into an unwinnable one for Whitney didn't come from my father, or from Cassandra, or from Joe Cantrell. It came from the original 1948 dam construction file. In the second week of October, Cassandra's paralegal, a 30-year-old woman named Della Yost, who had grown up in Beech Creek, drove to the North Carolina State Archives in Raleigh and pulled the complete construction file, 8 inches thick. My grandfather's original 1948 dam permit application, the 1948 floodplain survey, the original grant of impoundment from the state, every annual inspection report from 1949 through 2024, and 1 document Della called me about from her hotel room on a Wednesday night. "Wyatt, you need to see this." She sent a photograph. It was a 1973 letter on North Carolina Department of Natural Resources letterhead addressed to Otis Honeycutt at the Beech Creek Post Office, signed by the regional dam safety engineer of the period. The letter informed my grandfather that, following his heart attack of January 1973, the state was granting him a temporary operational variance, allowing him to maintain the reservoir at a reduced pool elevation of 2,772 feet 11 feet below the design full pool of 2,783 feet. The variance was temporary. The variance was to be reviewed every 10 years. The variance did not extinguish the lake's full legal footprint. The variance specifically reserved the family's right to restore the lake to its full pool at any time with 30 days' notice to the state. The variance had been reissued every 10 years since 1973. The most recent reissuance was 2023. It expired November 1, 2025, 13 days before my scheduled inspection. When the variance expired, the lake legally returned by operation of state law to its full pool elevation. Not as my election, as an automatic statutory reversion. The Honeycutt family didn't need to ask permission to fill the lake. The variance had been keeping it low. The variance was expiring. The lake's legal default was full. Every one of Whitney Vandermark's 109 cabins had been built between 2022 and 2025 inside a footprint that the state of North Carolina had been identifying by recorded letter as the lake's full legal pool for 52 years. I sat in my father's kitchen with the phone in my hand and the photograph on my screen and did not move for about 3 minutes. Then I called my father in. I showed him the letter. He read it slowly, his good hand on the paper, his lips moving once with my grandfather's name. He looked up at me with that patient half-smile. "Son, your grandfather knew. He kept the variance because he was tired. He kept it temporary because he wanted his son or his grandson to decide. He never wanted to make that decision for either of us. Wyatt, you get to decide whether to fill the lake." I thought about it for one long minute. "Pop, the variance expires anyway. I don't have to decide." He smiled. "Even better." I poured him a glass of buttermilk. He drank half of it. Then he said, "He told me once he was tired, but he wasn't done. He told me he was leaving the lake half empty so that whoever loved it the most would get to fill it. He never said which of us he meant." He set the glass down. "I think it turns out he meant you." Cassandra filed 3 documents in Raleigh: a notice of variance non-renewal, a routine 10-year dam safety inspection notice for November 14, 2025, requiring full pool integrity testing per the North Carolina Dam Safety Act, and a recorded restatement of the original 1948 grant of impoundment with the modern surveyed full pool footprint attached as an exhibit. The footprint encompassed every one of Whitney's 109 cabins. The legal mechanics are worth explaining plainly. A dam owner in North Carolina holds 3 interlocking property interests: fee simple ownership of the dam and impoundment structure,